Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome to a very Keiser Christmas. Now, Santa Claus and Rudolph were scheduled to deliver a bounty of toys today, but due to supply chain constraints and the cost of feeding the reindeer skyrocketing, down through the chimney and into the living room pops Dan Collins to explain all this to us. Dan, welcome to our Keiser Christmas show.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Of course, you also normally would bring a lump of coal, but there's also a shortage of supply of coal. So we'll just have to accept your words, your pearls of wisdom, let's say, here. So, we look back at 2021 and we look forward at 2022 in this Christmas special. It is Christmas Day, and normally, most Christmas presents here in the United States anyway come from China. We've had huge constraints in supply over the past year. That was certainly the biggest story, I would assume you're going to say, of 2021. Go a little bit further into what you think of that and other big stories of 2021 in that U.S.-China Thucydides Trap relationship.
I think 2021 has really exposed kind of the broken economy in the United States. We are what I call warehouse nation now. We are a nation, as they called Britain used to be a nation of shopkeepers. The United States is now a nation of warehouses. We don't make anything anymore. We gradually lost our industrial capacity over the years. 2008 financial crisis was a real shock. We lost 50 to 80,000 factories. Those guys never came back to a host of different issues. But we're now a nation of warehouses. Santa's reindeer all backed up at the Port of Long Beach. Can take 30 days this year. It's stretched over 30 days now to get something off a boat and onto a truck. All the ports in the United States have been backed up all year. The ports in China have been backed up. We've never seen any kind of issues like this where you can't get containers. Shipping prices are up multiples. I mean, 300, 400%. This year we saw container prices go over $20,000. They used to be $3,500. So you literally are cracking the supply chain to a degree that everything is breaking down. There are products that no longer make sense to ship because of the shipping costs, yet we don't make anything in the United States. We can't replace them. So we're going to be in the situation for all of 2022, until we can figure out at the root cause of what's going wrong with American capitalism and why a nation of 330 million people can't make anything for themselves.
Well, we've been talking about that for a number of years. It's easier to print money than to manufacture goods and try to sell them overseas. And so with that in mind, for the past 40 years, the U.S. no longer has that manufacturing base. And so they become beholden to China. And we're also seeing some interesting developments out of China. So in October, the balance of trade, a power change when China surprised U.S. intelligence by launching a hypersonic missile traveling 5 times the speed of sound. What's the story in this? Are reports coming out about this? Has this been verified? What's going on?
It is verified. It is what some people refer to as the new Sputnik moment. However, we've also used the Huawei 5G technology as the Sputnik moment. I would call this a new Cuban Missile Crisis moment. The China narrative has changed over the years. It used to be an economic story. It quickly went into a tech story. We started to realize, wow, we're actually behind on the tech. China's got 5G. We don't. We have nobody making it. And now it's moved into a military story with such aggression going on both sides in the South China Sea. So this hypersonic missile, a traditional ICBM has a low Earth orbit arc that's very static. It doesn't change. This hypersonic missile went around the entire world at a very low Earth orbit at 5,000 miles an hour, 5 times the speed of sound. You can't track it. So the United States today, we have missile batteries in California and Alaska, about 40 of them, to try to take down a rogue ICBM from somebody like North Korea. This changes the game. This basically means China and U.S. will have mutually assured destruction. It's gone out this year. China's building 300 to 500 new nuclear missile silos. Who knows how many really they'll have? But these will all be outfitted with hypersonic missiles, a technology the United States doesn't have. China's literally passed us not only in consumer tech, but now in military tech. They are showing a few areas where they're ahead of the United States. And in most weapons platforms, China can build the same thing, except at 10 to 20% of the cost. And that's because we've lost our industrial base. We have, if you study the defense industry, most components in the defense industry, you know, it's an oligopoly of the Lockheed Martins and the Boeings. And below these guys are all one factory making one part number, family owned, not competitive. This country's not making, you know, we're replacing half the naval fleet now is in maintenance, getting repaired with Chinese stainless steel. We don't have rare earth. We don't have sensors. We don't have chips. We don't have components. So it's a mess. This could be a new Cuban Missile Crisis, but I assume the U.S. government will kind of ignore this like they ignore most things, and it will be an extraordinary success of some kind.
It was extraordinary, this October surprise, what you're calling a new Cuban Missile Crisis. We do have a sort of a lethargy and an entropy up at the top of our institutions. And there, I mean, the fact that they said that U.S. intelligence had been surprised by this, of course, you know.
U.S. intelligence has been completely gutted in China. As you know, Stacy, like came out earlier this year, the United States lost the entire network in China. There was over 30 people executed. They were hacked, and all the CIA assets are in China, have been gone for 2 to 3 years. So it doesn't surprise me they have no intelligence on this. I mean, we're under, like you just said, we're in an institutional collapse of some kind. You can see it in the military, you can see it in the money printing, you can see it in the lack of being able to get anything done. And that's where we're at.
Also, like if you tune into the cable news, in particular MSNBC, like half of the TV presenters are like celebrity intelligence bimbos, right? They're CIA agents, FBI agents, and they're like on television instead, which kind of reminds you of the end of the Roman Empire. Like there's a sort of bimbofication going on, and you know, who doesn't want to be a celebrity instead of like going out there and having to track down, you know, Chinese spies or something? It's just easier,
right.
Well, you know, better paid and less likely to end up, I don't know, dead or something. But, you know, I guess the most important part of this balance of power, yes, I think a mutually assured destruction has in the past proven to be a positive for most people because it does end the chance of war. But there is that one thing of Taiwan. You know, we had in 2021 the humiliating pullout of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, leaving behind billions and billions of dollars worth of weapons. So what is the chance of conflict over Taiwan? Because is it something that could happen? Is it something that the U.S. could possibly even remotely win if they can't even beat the Taliban?
Chance of confrontation is extremely high. As you mentioned, in Afghanistan, we left behind $80 billion in equipment. The entire Russian military budget's $50 billion. So it's, you know, we were literally chased out of the country by the Taliban after spending $2.2 trillion. That's an extraordinary success. If people think we can defend Taiwan, they're lunatics. So China has so many land-based cruise missiles that could go through the first island chain all the way down to Guam. Taiwan is in the first island chain. We could not defend Taiwan militarily. And you've seen some of that come out of the Pentagon recently, like they're admitting that there's nothing you could do for Taiwan. Taiwan is trying to develop what they call the porcupine strategy. They're trying to make it tough enough so that China won't invade. What people don't realize about China is that it's a nationalist. It's in a very big phase in nationalism. Not so much Marxist-Leninism is kind of a dead philosophy to these guys. It's a nationalist country. The CPC actually holds back the population's view on Taiwan. The population's demanding Taiwan gets invaded. Xi Jinping has said before 2025, Taiwan will be reunited. So I think Taiwan's on the clock. Well, how that's going to affect us is 40% of the world's semiconductors still come out of Taiwan. When China has control of that, we're going to have to beg for chips. We won't be able to make a F-150. We won't be able to do anything here without chips.
I thought, you know, necessity would drive the innovation and the building of the manufacturing capacity. So like when the pandemic happened and we saw the beginning of the shortages of things like toilet paper and face mask, PPE, I assumed that somebody would do something and we would restore some sort of manufacturing for these basic goods needs, pharmaceuticals. nothing ever happened with that. So, you know, do you think it's related to the end of the US dollar? This fiat system has kind of made us all that laying flat movement that's happening in China, where they're the other side of the fiat dollars. We send them all our fiat dollars and they send us their goods. And the reason why I asked that is because another big story of 2021 was China kicking the Bitcoin miners out. Now, this is the hardest money ever created, ever found in the universe. And immediately, like 2 years later with the pandemic, we haven't figured out anything. We can't manufacture a mask still. And yet within 3 months, the entirety of all those Chinese miners left China, set up in Kazakhstan, set up in the United States and Texas. So the United States is now the largest producer of Bitcoin. They're the biggest mining operations there. So, I mean, do you kind of follow that and think that's a truth, that this is a kind of a lethargy setting in because of the end of a fiat system?
Yeah, absolutely. So for 2 points, on the first point, when we talk about the money printing has created massive misprice signals throughout the entire American economy since 1971. We are a paper empire. The paper aristocracy gets all that free money. It doesn't pay to set up a manufacturing plant. That's a real capex, right? They don't want to sell you a car. They want to lease you a car. They don't want to sell you furniture. They want to lease you furniture. Everything has become financialized. The private equity that takes 0% money, free money, their first thing is to cut all the jobs, close the factories, and outsource it. Okay, our whole system is set up not to make anything here because it damages your financials because you're spending real money to build real plants. If you look at the chips, Intel just asked the government for $100 billion to build a chip plant, but 6 months ago, they paid out $100 billion in stock buybacks. So they really want free money just to build a factory. Otherwise, the financial roller coaster just keeps rolling. And our signals in this economy is just paper money, print it and flip it. It's not to build anything real. That's the root cause we got to get at too. Regarding the Bitcoin mining, this is the first win the United States has had against China in a decade. This is a win. That's kind of the model, is entrepreneurs, you know, Bitcoin mining, as you know, I had a Bitcoin mine myself, a whole industrial facility. So I do follow it. And these guys, what they did was pretty incredible. I mean, the hash rate collapsed and then was back in 3 months. Entrepreneurs, young, you know, new entrepreneurs setting it up, and it's a very industrial type process. You have to manage your electricity, your heating, your cooling, these types of things. So getting the assets, which are the miners, setting it up. So I think that's kind of the new model. We have to look at the whole ecosystem of all types of industrial and manufacturing and make sure the ecosystem makes it available for miners or just anyone in the industrial supply chain to rebuild the country.
Oh, wow. This is a positive note for sure. Well, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, more with Dan Collins on our Keiser Christmas Fandango special. Don't go away. Welcome back to A Very Keiser Christmas with Max Keiser and Stacy Herbert. Filling in for Santa Claus today is Dan Collins. And we're talking about geopolitics and stuff like that. China, America. Dan, let's discuss the consumer side of this U.S.-China relationship. You described the United States as a warehouse economy. If the U.K. was a nation of shopkeepers during the last days of the empire, we are now a warehouse economy, as you have stated. It's kind of our characteristic now. Chip manufacturers in the U.S. spent tens of billions on share buybacks. They're now getting handed tens of billions from the taxpayer to build foundries in the U.S. Is that going to go well?
You know, in China, they're kind of making fun of us because we do have some chip foundries in production in Arizona. They're building them up, and they're kind of sharing pictures now on the internet. Look at this plant. It's a year later, hardly anything's happened. So in China, they build it in 6 months, but over here, it takes a year. We just have the foundation dug. So that's kind of going around in Twitter now, especially amongst the Chinese wolf warrior diplomats. They're kind of laughing like, ah. And we forced the chip makers to come here. That's a good idea. We have to produce something here locally. Otherwise, we're always going to be at the mercy of China for chips.
Speaking of chips and high tech, Huawei was in the news in 2021, and that came to a head with the arrest of the woman who is the daughter of the founder of Huawei, and I guess she was the CEO. She was released China sent a jumbo jet to come collect her, and she was met on the runway by thousands of Chinese fans of her, and it was a very nationalistic moment from what I could tell. Why do you think Biden did this deal? Of course, if Trump had done this, this would have been, everybody would have been up in arms. But what's that signaling to you in terms of the next 2 years or 3 years of his administration?
Yeah, she's a national hero in China, no doubt. I mean, it was like the biggest news for a week. It's a sign of a potential thaw between China-U.S. relations. I have information now that large state-owned enterprises are negotiating LNG contracts with the United States. So that's going to help drive down the trade deficit. There's a lot of work to do. You know, Boeing has not had an order from China in 5 years. So China's by far the largest aviation market. So there's a lot of bilateral trade that could happen in a potential thaw. However, the issues in the East China Sea, South China Sea with Chinese military aggression is kind of putting those kinds of things on hold. But you know, we'll see as 2022 develops if we're going to move into more of a thawing in the relationship, or it's just going to continue to ratchet up into a war footing.
You've been the only one that's been right of all the analysts on China for the last 10, 15, 20 years. Fortunately, you have been a friend of Keiser Report, and we've been the only outlet that has called it right. Most U.S. media has said for the past 10, 15 years, they've had the likes of Kyle Bass on, and even worse than him in terms of getting it wrong, is that they've kept on saying that it's collapsing, it's collapsing, it's collapsing, the housing bust. But in this past year, we did see President Xi really crack down genuinely on the big finance, like Alibaba, Jack Ma was, something happened with him. We're not quite clear. But we also saw the property developers, they cracked down on them. So what, is this actually going to be the moment that finally all those CNBC and Bloomberg columnists and opinion makers are right? Or is this, do you think it's just a lot of nothing?
You get a guy like Kyle Bass, who's been wrong now for 10 years. His hedge fund has shrunk 90%. He's just kind of a disaster. And you got guys like Gordon Chang that gets reeled out onto he's literally 0 for 212 on Chinese predictions for 20 years. He wrote a book, 2001, The Coming Collapse of China. And I read it. It was like a child had written it. It was nonsense, but he keeps getting wheeled out there, you know. So these guys, what's happened in 2021, people don't understand the root cause of China. Who really owns these companies? Huawei has a murky ownership, okay? Who really owns Huawei and Alibaba and Evergrande are top CCP families, Chinese Communist Party. There's an estimated 60 billionaires in the Communist Party, you know, top standing committee. So there's hidden ownership in all these companies. And what you have is fight amongst the princelings. So all these guys have gotten, you know, Jack Ma owns Alibaba, but there's 100 other owners that have big shares in the company that you don't know. Evergrande, you can't do that kind of business without being super politically connected, but they have a front man up as an ownership. So what's going on is Xi Jinping, the premier, is battling other family dynasties in the Chinese Communist Party. That's what's really going on. You can't lose money in Chinese property. You build an apartment for 6,000 RMB a square meter and you sell it for 50,000 RMB a square meter. What's happened is, like in the Evergrande case, their debt just they get a call on their debt. So Xi Jinping's people tell the bank, stop issuing credit. They have massive amounts of assets. It will not lead to a contagion, even though it you know, while we're over here collapsing, we printed 40% of all dollars in the last 18 months. We're under a hyper collapse here, but yet we focus on Evergrande. China just use the local governments to bail them out. Some people, especially the foreigners, are probably going to lose debt, and Evergrande could not continue, you know, as it is today, as well as the whole property sector. But what's going on in the clampdown on Chinese companies is really infighting between CPC families, and that's what the Western media don't understand. That's why they get it wrong every time.
Let's take a look at, again, on the Bitcoin situation. People liken the China shutting down of the Bitcoin mining as the second biggest mistake they've made in 500 years after they burnt down their treasure fleet under the Ming Dynasty. You know, I think about what happened in the 1980s with the U.S. and Japan, right? At that time, Japan was about to take over. It was the Japan that can say no. Every op-ed piece was about Japan's style of management and manufacturing was going to eclipse the U.S. It was a foregone conclusion. And then with the introduction of the internet, Japan, because it's a conformist society, they did not have the intellectual capacity to develop all the creativity we saw on the internet, and that whole story died. As a matter of fact, the stock market peaked, the property bubble blew up, and they've been in 20 years in recession. But with China, can you make a parallel here? Because here you have Bitcoin is the new internet. It's internet on steroids, and it's powering a revolution across the monetary networks of the world, and everything's being built on the Bitcoin. Are we going to see a replay of this 1980s U.S.-Japan story?
China, and I remember those days of Japan. I still, I had a Sony Walkman myself. What happened with China, though, is 20 times the size of Japan. That's the difference. And they're far above us technically. So I don't think they'll fade off as quickly as, like, say, a Japan. Regarding the Bitcoin mining, I have said today we're at $1 trillion asset for Bitcoin. When it's $10 trillion, I think the Chinese may wake up and go, okay, we got to get back in this market. They still control the equipment manufacturing, but they have banned mining and holding Bitcoin because they want to pump out the digital RMB. They want full control. So we're really, the world's going to go between full control and decentralization, like what Bitcoin is, the network. So I believe at some point, it won't be a year, it might not be 2 years, but at some point they'll probably make a reversal and say, okay, this is a $10 trillion global asset. It's, it's become a micropayment over the Lightning Network. PO trade finance is happening in Bitcoin, and which does today. A guy in Nigeria will just send Bitcoin to a trader, to a guy in China who's got an account out of Hong Kong or United States, because it's so much easier than transferring over the SWIFT system. The SWIFT system's dying. Russia and China want out of it. We've weaponized it. The whole world's getting out of that. The answer is Bitcoin. Has China made huge mistake? Absolutely, because most of these guys are 80 years old that run China. But I think in a couple of years, they'll probably make a reversal at some point.
Of course, most of the people who run the United States are also in their 80s. It does just feel like kind of a coterminous thing, right? They're both, it is going to be like, everybody keeps on saying, well, we have this Thucydides trap and China's the rising power and blah, blah, blah. But that's kind of like an old model that we've had for the last few hundred years of big nation states. Of course, China is more like a civilization rather than a nation state. But Bitcoin is a civilization as well, right? It's its own culture. And as you pointed out, the pioneer spirit of being able to just like pick up and move across the entire world with all your operations and set up and start operating somewhere else within months is just unheard of anywhere else. So, I mean, can you see a positive outcome? Like, Thucydides traps are usually quite violent throughout history, but we could see them start to pass and just like kind of collapse together in a way, and we'll have this new paradigm post fiat dollar, SWIFT sort of system, command and control, centralized. We're going to have a more decentralized Bitcoin civilization.
Yeah, I see the world going into two orbits. You're in a China orbit or you're in the US orbit. We've kind of decoupled, although we're still highly dependent on China for everything. I kind of use an analogy that China's gone into 1984 and the United States is going into Blade Runner. So China is highly controlled. They're becoming more controlled. They're going to keep making mistakes like they did with Bitcoin. Like they did in this year with the power shortage. They told everyone to meet emission targets. They wouldn't let the coal producers, or they wouldn't let the electrical producers increase their price. So they kind of slow walked electrical production. All of a sudden there's no power. They're going to keep making these mistakes as they've centralized. As I've said before, China grew from capitalism. They were the Wild West of capitalism for 20 years. Finally, when they took over the world economy, and they do own the world economy, keep in mind, they produce twice the electricity the United States does. Half of the world's raw materials flow into China for processing. Their economy is far, far bigger than the United States. It's just, our GDP numbers are like our inflation statistics. They're not real. We're just flipping goods to each other on paper and services. So Yeah, where we're going, it's going to be, we're going to have to reindustrialize the United States with this whole Bitcoin ethos, young entrepreneurs, technology, Lightning Network, you know, Stripe, these kinds of things, and use that as a model to reindustrialize everything.
Well, I think that's a very positive note to end on this Christmas. It's not all bad. It's not all good. It's more than a lump of coal, right?
TikTok next block. It's all happening on the TikTok block, Bitcoin, blockchain. Dan Collins, special thanks for filling in for Santa Claus this year. I know you have to get back to the reindeer. They're hungry. And I believe there's some Chinese food on the menu this year, which Rudolph loves. But thanks for being on Keiser Report.
Merry Christmas.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. Again, thanks for our guest, Dan Collins. Until next time, bye, y'all.